Fianna reflecting on the debate and the speeches that we've just had, I would just like to remark that that great phrase, Frankfurt's way or Labour's way, doesn't sound too dissimilar to Europe can bugger off. And I think in many respects that, no, it's not. It's just on foot of what I just heard. But in many respects, I think the debate and what we've had is a perfect illustration of why the people have for a long time and in ever greater numbers lost confidence in this government. Elected with the largest majority in our history and backed by the genuine goodwill of even non-supporters, Fine Gael and Labour had an unprecedented opportunity to implement reform. They had the space to put in place a vision for a fairer Ireland. And they also had a lengthy media honeymoon to keep some of the normal pressures away. But they choose a different way. There has been no new social or economic blueprint for our future. There has been no attempt to change how our country is governed. There has been no interest in reaching out to those without political power. This is an arrogant, out of touch and increasingly out of control government which has been deeply unfair and divisive. With its trail of broken promises and obsession with spin, it has broken faith with the people who elected it. It has been deeply divisive in its policies. It has been blind to the destructive impact it has had in area after area. Time and again, major problems have been allowed to develop directly because of government policies and have only been addressed when there has been a massive public backlash. You, Taoiseach, have repeatedly come in here to tell us how everything is going fine, only to see hospitals, schools, the Garda Síochána, property tax, water charges, medical cards, household debts, personal pensions, job insecurity, housing, drug abuse, and area after area of public services slide into crisis. As we've heard yet again today, this is a government which is so out of touch that it doesn't have the faintest idea why it is so profoundly unpopular and continues to spark loud resistance. Yet again, we've heard the fairy tale story of a selfless government which came to office and turned everything around and only has problems because of how hard it has been working on our behalf. There are occasional admissions of small mistakes, but the Taoiseach, Taoiseach and their dwindling band of followers basically believe that people aren't giving them the credit they deserve. According to them, anything bad they did was only because they were forced to do it. And this is a story which is as dishonest as it is discredited. In its nearly 4 years in office, this government has never produced a plan for the economic and social development of our country. In fact, its very first decision as a coalition was not to negotiate a new fiscal framework. For its first 3 years, it followed the broad guidelines of the plan it inherited and by the way, had campaigned against in the general election. And when I heard the Taoiseach refer earlier, he attacked people who opposed the plan. No one opposed the plan more persistently and consistently than the Taoiseach himself and the previous Taoiseach and the current Taoiseach, and voted against large measures of that plan which he was subsequently to claim credit for. And however, Fine Gael and Labour did begin one decisive shift in policy. They've made taxation and public spending significantly more regressive. They've repeatedly ignored the ability to pay when imposing taxes and charges, and they've targeted cutbacks on the weakest sections of the community. As every independent study has shown, the budgets introduced by my late colleague Brian Lenihan were ones where the wealthiest bore the biggest burden. And as every independent study has also confirmed, Fine Gael and Labour have implemented 4 budgets out of 4 where struggling families have borne the biggest burden. Hear, hear. From day one, this government has put politics before substance. It has seen every problem in terms of how do we spin it. After an enormous defeat in May's local elections, after rising discontent on the doorsteps and in the streets, and after a forced reshuffle, after an uprising in Labour and disquiet in Fine Gael, the government still doesn't get it. It still doesn't understand the anger, the frustration and basic everyday struggle of families throughout the country. This debate has been framed as a new start, the moment when the government gets its act together and starts communicating its message. The Taoiseach set it off yesterday with his launch of Fine Gael's budget calculator, to be accompanied by leafleting in every constituency. The calculator is, according to Fine Gael, it's there to show everyone how much money they are, quote, putting back in your pocket. The calculator shows that the average family will get dramatically less than a high-income family. But the real revelation is to be found buried in the section termed assumption. There you find two incredible statements. First, it says local property tax liabilities are ignored. Second, it says that water charges are not included, and the tax credit in respect of water charges paid during 2015 will be paid in 2016. Once again, this government just does not get it. A government that implements damaging and unfair policies, but thinks it can spin its way out of trouble. It's important to note that Labour fully shares this commitment to selective and dishonest spin. This week, it too has launched a post-budget offensive with a claim that nearly 1.2 million children will be benefiting from the child benefit increase it claims it has secured. It takes a special level of cynicism to cut something you said you would never touch and then ask for credit when you give a bit of it back. It is true that fiscal consolidation has been important and it has been unavoidable. Those parties which like to pretend that all hard decisions could have been avoided are as dishonest as those who pretend that they have had no impact. In his claims about bringing the budget under control, the Taoiseach, of course, again refused to acknowledge that 2/3 of the required measures were brought into law before he came into office. And he also failed to mention that, as I've said earlier, that he personally voted against the bulk of measures, which today he tries to claim credit for. Unsurprisingly, the Taoiseach has found no room to acknowledge how European policies, negotiated by others and automatically extended to Ireland, gave him billions towards achieving targets. Today, our economy is undeniably stronger than it was, and equally undeniable is the fact that the core reason for this has nothing to do with this government. It is the skills and hard work of the Irish people. Minister Riley, you were removed from health because of your miserable failures in the Department of Health. And that's why the Taoiseach did that to you. So with the greatest of respect, you're the last person in the Cabinet who should open his mouth here today. Because you are the personification.
Sorry, let's get back to the
You are the personification of why people have lost confidence in this government.
Thank you. Through the chair, please address. Sorry,
it is a Ceann Comhairle, the skills and hard works of the Irish people that have helped our economy, not the short-term damaging and divisive policies of this government. And these skills were built up over decades, and the areas of the economy which have grown are ones which were present and growing before 2011, particularly foreign direct investment and the whole area pertaining to that. And this week there will once again, as we know, and we will see tomorrow, major demonstrations over the deeply unfair water charges and the manner in which that was implemented. And as Minister Noonan apparently confirmed in an angry letter to the European Commission, this is a policy which has been fully at the discretion of the government. I mean, that's what Minister Noonan has just said to the Commission. It was totally at your discretion, and he still claims it's totally at his discretion. But the bloated and wasteful utility Irish water was one of Fine Gael's longest-standing policies. Longest-standing policies, go back to 2009, and Minister Coveney knows all about it because he conceived of it. The usage-based charge was defended by the party from the very start in the New Era document, and we've ended up with a situation. We've ended up in a situation where a charge has been imposed in order to fund meters which are pointless, to maintain a bureaucracy which no one wants, and to justify an accounting gimmick which may not work. You have no one to blame for this fiasco but yourselves. And this was a defining issue in May, whether you like it or not. The Taoiseach said he understood the message loud and clear. The Cabinet spent 4 months preparing a final answer, which lasted 4 weeks. Why can't you just bow to the inevitable and end this issue? Irish water should be abolished, and this charge should be suspended immediately. If things keep going as they are, we will end up with a huge hole in the national budget and people paying for declining investment in water services. This increasingly chaotic approach to policy, where ministerial actions ignore and make major problems worse, has been seen in nearly every department, and there is no reason to believe it will end soon. As Fianna Fáil pointed out repeatedly during the last year, housing pressures were being escalated by the Taoiseach's decision to restrict housing benefit, to cut the rent supplement and bring in the rent supplement caps. In order to make room for Fine Gael's higher income tax cut, she directly caused enormous problems for families and individuals. And I'm not just saying that. Focus Ireland, Simon, every housing agency out there has been saying that consistently over the last years. At local level, her party in Dublin, with Fine Gael's support, earlier this year tried to cut homeless services until forced to retreat by our councillors. I welcome the new commitment of the government to allocate emergency funding for homelessness, but this will merely be a sticking plaster if the more serious policy mistake of cutting housing benefit and rent supplement is not reversed. Unfortunately, we have heard nothing from the government to suggest that they understand this. There is growing evidence that the combination of neglect and targeted cutbacks is allowing the scourge of drugs to spread in more and more of our communities. And this is the first government in 3 decades not to have a minister assigned to either community development or combating drugs. And this shows itself in the reality of what has now been happening. There's been a sustained withdrawal of state support from marginalised communities, and drugs have been seen as only important as a public order issue. The social devastation that drugs are causing is nowhere on this government agenda, and was missing from the complacent and self-satisfied speeches of the government that we've heard to date. In the face of this, it shows something about the priorities of the Taoiseach and his party, that his only specific commitment for the next budget and for the years ahead is to cut taxes for the highest earners. In health, yet again claims of adequate funding have fallen apart within days. The damage done in 3 years of failed policies has not been reversed. At best, the rate of decline will be maintained. And the government has not given the HSE the funds required to maintain adequate services. The massive rise in waiting lists, still dismissed by the Taoiseach, will not be halted and will actually get worse. And while Minister Varadkar implies he knows they are flawed, the government remains committed to implementing a health funding model which would lead directly to a massive health tax. It would create a monster which would make Irish water look like value for money. In education, schools face a growing funding crisis, with those who serve poorer communities suffering disproportionately. Protests are being made by communities throughout the country as they see the impact on local life and on their children. And this is the direct result of regressive and avoidable policies, the abolition of postgraduate grants and the elimination of career guidance counsellors' ex-quota positions being 2 examples. The approach of trying to implement policy without discussion or review has directly led to last week's second-level school strikes and is part of a wider problem of refusing to engage with public servants. It was just this arrogant and dismissive approach which allowed the biggest crisis in the modern history of the Gardaí to develop, and it has also led to the withdrawal of community policing as the defining characteristic of An Garda Síochána. The pattern of neglecting problems and allowing them to become crises has also been shown itself in relation to Northern Ireland. When Fianna Fáil pointed out the collapsing public confidence in the behaviour of the DUP and Sinn Féin and the danger which this posed, we received sustained abuse in response, not just from those parties but from the government. The Taoiseach even gave a speech saying things had never been better. With growing problems on the street, rising sectarian tensions and an executive which is destroying public trust in the achievements of the Good Friday Agreement, this week the Taoiseach will for the first time attend a negotiation with the parties. And this is not a record to be proud of. The failure of the government to implement even one significant reform of politics and government confirms how it mainly cares about holding and retaining power. Appointing an advisory group on the Seanad without consultation about its role and membership confirms that nothing significant will be implemented. The Taoiseach himself must bear responsibility for the growing crisis in his government and the collapse of public trust in it. He busies himself with photo opportunities and brief comments, but has been the least accessible Taoiseach of modern times when it comes to detailed interviews or debates. You simply will not participate in them. He retreats behind overwritten political attacks and empty claims instead of directly engaging with opponents or the people he is here to serve. Aspa fís ag an rialtas seo. Agus éad na Gaelgade is léir go nachbhfuil an rialtas an áiríre, an sinne an fág go dairigh an ír Commissioner Tangacha Asanifig de bhar an Aspa Ibre ón rialtas. The government has had the opportunity to set a vision for a country which treats its younger and older citizens decently, to build a recovery felt by all. Instead, it has caused and deepened divisions and inequality. It has been unfair, and it has been increasingly incompetent. Without the guidance of other people's blueprints to follow, it has stumbled from crisis to crisis. It has no economic plan for the years ahead. It has no social plan for the years ahead. It is in office, but not leading. All it has is the ever more desperate desire to find a way of holding on to power. The people have shown that they have no confidence in this government to address their concerns and the needs of our country. Dáil should also have no confidence in a tired, arrogant and complacent government which will not acknowledge, let alone address, its many and growing failings. Thank you, Councillor.